I will start by introducing Professor Ken Timmis. I am honored to do so, but this could be a difficult job or an easy one. An easy one because everybody knows Ken Timmis and what he's achieved over the years. A hard one, or a hard version, would be for me to spend 10 minutes trying to say all of his achievements. I will only say three things. One, he's published about 500 research papers. He has an H index of 95. And he's the editor, the founder of 3 journals, one of which at least everybody knows, which is Environmental Microbiology, Microbiology, Environmental Biotechnology, and Environmental Microbiology Reports. So it's my honor to ask Ken Timmis to give us a talk about the urgent need for microbiological literacy in society.
Well, thank you very much, Milton, for this nice introduction. I will try and give my talk without percussion. So let's push on. So in May this year, a group of microbiologists published this editorial in Environmental Microbiology, the urgent need for microbiology literacy in society. So I'd just like to explain this initiative a little bit to you and give you an update of where we are in it. So I'm going to discuss a little bit the issue of why society needs to become microbiology literate. That will be the major part of the talk. A few words about how society might become microbiology literate. A few words about the education concept, and then a couple of concluding remarks. So, as you all know, microbes are pervasive in their activities and they affect us directly and indirectly in many ways. So they have a global importance. And just a couple of examples of this global importance: they generate 50% of the oxygen we breathe, they recycle most of the waste that we generate, and this meeting has been all about recycling waste. They are responsible for 2/3 of the oceanic carbon fixation, and carbon fixation obviously is very, very important in relation to global warming, greenhouse gas content of the atmosphere and global warming. And they make up 90% of the marine biomass. So collectively, they can be considered to be the life support system of the biosphere. Then there's the issue of microbiomes. So we and other animals and plants are covered with microbes that provide essential services. For instance, they provide digestive enzymes that allow us to extract more nutrients from the things that we take in than we would otherwise be able to do. And they provide us with all kinds of compounds that are essential to our ecophysiology that we can't make and we don't take in with our food. So they regulate to a significant extent organism well-being. So microbiomes are also a life support system, but they're life support systems of all higher organisms. If we consider the human, that's the human holobiont or biome, that's us and the microbes. This is, in terms of cell numbers, 50% microbial. So from birth to death, we live in an intimate, dynamic, and mutually beneficial relationship with our microbial partners. It's an integrated and reciprocal relationship that to a significant extent specifies what we are, how we are, and hence who we are. And so if we paraphrase Descartes or update Descartes, I think, therefore we are. Then there are some important applications, and I think we all know many of these applications. Just going to dinner, we eat olives, we drink wine, we eat bread, we eat salami. Many, many food products are provided to the table because of microbial activities. So Microbes provide sources of new therapies, of vaccines, of diagnostics. They're sources of new chemicals. They're sources of energy from renewables and from wastes. And we've heard about the application of microbial activities with wastes today and yesterday. They're sources of foods and of fermented foods and of flavorings. They are important in feeding us through agriculture because they promote plant growth and they suppress disease. They can be used to extract natural resources. Of course, they are the primordial waste recycling systems, and they also provide us with employment and economic advancement. And the thing is that microbial technology, biotechnology, is high-tech, it's innovative, it's problem-solving. We've heard a lot about problem-solving at this meeting. It's growing, it's expanding, and it's a significant driver of the creation of enterprises and employment. So the problem is that if we can't appreciate the impact of microbes and how they may influence our activities, we rely on ignorance to guide our decisions and on chance for outcomes. So we need microbial biology literacy to be able to take best available evidence-based decisions. Firstly, to help us and other members of the biosphere to live healthier lives. To avoid or minimize or mitigate avoidable catastrophes. I stress the word avoidable. If they're unavoidable, microbes won't help us. But if they're avoidable, they can help us. And I'll address that particular issue. That's why it's in red. Oh, excuse me. To optimally exploit benefits of biotechnology. To make evidence-based decisions that are the rule rather than the exception, by understanding the processes underlying the decisions we make, to increase the awareness of the wider context of personal issues, to better understand our environment and our position in the biosphere and our role in the biosphere and their role in the biosphere. To accelerate progress towards sustainability, this is something else I'll pick up in a moment, and to improve our stewardship of the planet. We generally consider that we are stewards of the planet. In reality, microbes are probably the stewards of the planet. But it doesn't matter, we are partners in this activity. And to have an effective partnership, we need to be able to understand our partners, to know them, and to know what we need to do to have them do what we want them to do. And something I'll stress several times in this talk, we have a cardinal duty to fulfill as stakeholders, to understand the possible consequences of decisions made on our behalf by politicians, by decision makers, to ensure transparency and oversight in decision making, and to inform the decision makers of our views. So I pick up on the point I made earlier, to minimize or to avoid catastrophes. And the first example I want to give is the antibiotic resistance crisis. Note that we tend to focus on bacteria when we talk about the antibiotic resistance crisis, but it's also relevant to other diseases like malaria and HIV. So I think you've seen this information before during this meeting. The predictions are that by 2050, if something doesn't change, of course it might, but if something doesn't change, there will be 10 million deaths per annum by 2050. And collectively, between now and then, the cost of these infectious diseases that can't be treated will accumulate to something like $100 trillion. Now, the other thing that we need to know about this is that from the beginning of the 1960s, the increasing antibiotic resistance, which was assumed to be resulting from the non-clinical use of antibiotics, was already publicized, was already known. So Falco in 1961, Watanabe in 1963, and Levy in 1966 were showing that the use of antibiotics was leading to antibiotic resistance. And they warned us that this would only grow with the inappropriate use of the antibiotics. Nevertheless, over the next 6 decades, rather than reducing the non-human clinical use of antibiotics, there's been a continual rise in antibiotics, in use of antibiotics as growth promoters primarily in animal rearing, and importantly, in aquaculture. So the antimicrobial resistance crisis might have been avoided or might have been minimized if policymakers, regulators, and the general public, the stakeholders, us, had been microbiology literate and able to appreciate the warnings of Falco, Watanabe, and Levy. And there's another aspect. So we can consider the antibiotic resistance problem as a problem, but it's a crisis. And the reason it's a crisis is this second aspect, namely, the pipelines of new antibiotics are practically empty. So we are on now the drugs of last resort, and we have organisms that are resistant to these drugs. So they are ineffective in some cases, and they're becoming more ineffective as the resistance spreads. But if we had other antibiotics in the pipeline, this wouldn't be a problem because we would have new drugs of last resort, but we don't. So from 2003 and 2013, this decade, something like less than 5% of venture capital investment in pharma R&D went in the search of new drugs. So this is why the pipelines are empty. There's very little investment in the in drug discovery programs. So who's responsible now for dealing with this problem? Well, of course, it's governments and it's international organizations. They have to deal with it. And the question that we have to pose is, are they regulating antibiotic usage effectively? So one piece of data in the United States in 2012, more than 70% of the total amount of antibiotics produced were being used in animal rearing. Second question, are they providing the necessary regulatory and financial framework to encourage investment in antimicrobial discovery? And the third question, do the decision makers themselves have the knowledge necessary for evidence-based decisions? So antimicrobial resistance and effective antimicrobial therapy lies at the center of infectious disease treatment. So since we are all subject to infections, and as many of you will know, I came here with a flu or a cold. And probably I've infected something like 20% of you, and you'll have a miserable weekend, okay? So we're all stakeholders. And for stakeholders to inform decision makers, everybody needs to understand the underlying issues. So the next example I want to give is the return of virtually eradicated preventable childhood diseases. Note again the word preventable. So, measles, whooping cough, diphtheria. Why? Because the vaccination uptake is diminishing. And this is because of parental concern about vaccination risks. And this parental concern, which is perfectly natural, is being exacerbated by misinformation and conspiracy theories. So as a result, herd immunity in the community is decreasing and infection rates are on the increase. So knowledge obviously counteracts misinformation. It counteracts prejudice and it counteracts conspiracy theories. And the final example I want to give is the plastic oceans, which we've heard quite a lot about at this meeting. So the thing is that many of the early chemicals that were made, which actually really advanced society, they were actually designed to be exceptionally stable and recalcitrant to biological, chemical, and thermal degradation. Things like polychlorinated aromatics, PCBs. But in those days, they were not adequately assessed for long-term environmental impact. Plastics have been designed to be robust, long-lived, and useful for the packaging of everything, which is why we have enormous quantities of plastics in the environment. And their ubiquity makes them a major component of landfills and waste that is simply dumped into the environment. And ultimately they make their way into the sea. But we've known about the inability of microorganisms to degrade plastics for a very long time. So why weren't we using that information to prevent this kind of situation? So this could have been minimized, at least, by appropriate energy-based policy decisions. So there's an urgent need for effective policies and regulation of production, use and disposal of plastics, and for stakeholder knowledge of microbial recycling limitations. We've been talking about, at this meeting, about what microbes can do, but we have to recognize that microbes can't do everything, or they can't do them fast enough, and so they have limitations. And it's these limitations that will determine plastics' life cycles and their environmental impact. So we need to know about that in order to inform policymakers and decision makers. So I mentioned earlier in the talk that it's really important for us to not just consider our place in relation to our immediate environment, but also to consider it in the wider context. And as we know, we are faced with grand challenges. We've seen a couple of them already, and sustainability of the planet. So humanity is currently facing major challenges, and these include an imbalance of access to food, to clean water, to healthcare, to education, to energy, and to raw materials. We have persisting poverty, which is increasing. We have a loss of populated land due to global warming and rising sea levels. And we have a loss of agricultural land due to desertification, which is the soil crisis, which has also been discussed several times at this meeting. So in terms of planetary sustainability and human sustainability, an action plan has been developed by the United Nations to try to put us on a sustainable trajectory. And this is the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. And this is encapsulated in the Sustainable Development Goals. You probably can't see them all, but it's not that important. What I wanted to mention is that there are 17 of them. And microbial technologies have the capacity to contribute to attainment of many of these Sustainable Development Goals. Actually, we have published in Microbial Biotechnology a special issue on this, and if you would like more information, you should go back to Microbial Biotechnology 2017, and you can see some very interesting articles on this, which shows how the microbial technologies can contribute to, for example, ending hunger by providing sustainable agriculture, ensuring healthy lives. This is all about healthcare. Availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation for all, access to sustainable energy, and so on. So it's important for us to know about sustainability. It's important for us to know what the sustainable goals are and what we can contribute to them, and especially what microbial activities can contribute to them. So I've stressed so far the more global aspects of microbial literacy, why we need to influence policymakers. But microbial literacy is not only needed by policymakers and stakeholders, but everyone is affected on a daily basis by microbial processes. And if we are to make decisions about our daily activities, we need to understand these and then transit from an evidence-based everyday decision from decisions based on ignorance. Just a few examples. Shall I have a baby by cesarean or a natural birth? Do I want to hand over my microbial flora to my newborn baby? Do I want to breastfeed or formula feed? Do I want to hand over all of the immune protection that I've built up to my infant? Do I want to encourage the colonization by bifidobacterium, which orchestrates development of the immune system? Do I want to use powerful disinfectants frequently to have a super clean home? We know that our health is dependent upon having a very diverse microbiome, and therefore, if we make our homes too clean, then we are reducing the renewal of our microbiome by new organisms. Am I going to be vaccinated, or am I going to be treated for an infection? Do I use phosphorus-containing household cleaning products, because phosphorus creates eutrophication when it gets into water systems? Do I want to use a germicidal soap on my skin and then destroy the microbiome of my skin, which is protective for many things? Do I want to acquire a companion dog? I'll come back to that. What kind of food do I want to eat? Do I want to eat beef like we ate last night? It was wonderful. Of course we want to eat beef, but we have to know that beef comes with an environmental footprint. It's a major contributor, ruminants are major contributors to methane production. Do I want to eat shrimp from waters that contain arsenic? Do I want to use that product in the pantry which is past its sell-by date? Do I want to eat something which has a known risk factor? How do I make food, and how do I store it, and how long? How much do I ventilate my home? How much do I humidify it in winter, and how much do I dehumidify it in summer? All kinds of everyday questions that confront us and that we should be aware of, and we need to know the microbiology behind it. So microbiology literacy is essential to transit from an ignorance-based decisions and chance-based outcomes to a knowledge-based stewardship of our lives, the biosphere, and the planet. Okay, so how do we achieve microbiology literacy? Well, you think immediately of school. What happens in school? We provide children with a knowledge base, and we provide them with critical assessment ability that we hope will be adequate for them to passage into mature adults. And what kind of knowledge do we provide them with? Well, usually the native language, a foreign language, history, geography, mathematics, chemistry, biology, and so on. So these are considered to be essential for this passage to adulthood. But the authors of this editorial believe, as indeed Berge expressed in 1916, that knowledge and understanding of microbes and their activities is as essential to general education as these topics. And the way we've expressed it is microbiology literacy must become part of the job description of adults, must become part of the job description of world citizens, who will then be empowered to take informed decisions for themselves and for others, for instance, their offspring. Critically assess the arguments for and against decision alternatives, and thereby deliver informed preferences to those taking decisions on their behalf, and to be able to hold to account those who do not take decisions based on scientific evidence. So, microbiology should be taught in school. So, how might we do this? So, our concept is to have a child experience-centric concept. And this involves a series of 100 to 150 more or less standalone lessons, so teachers can mix and match. This is an international initiative, so with many different teaching styles, teaching programs and so on around the world. So in order to accommodate this diversity of teaching, we want to allow teachers to mix and match at will and therefore we need more or less standalone lessons. But the important thing is that each of these lessons is introduced by a child's question to create interest. So how do we prepare a curriculum which should be so generic that it can be applied not only anywhere in the world, but also at any age, for any age group? And so what we've decided is that we will have a kind of framework, a generic framework for each topic that we think is important. And because it's only a framework and it's generic, it's then adaptable by teachers to all age groups. And crucially, the topic framework tries to place the issue which is treated not only in its microbiological context, but also in the context of wider issues, in the context of the grand challenges and the Sustainable Development Goals. Microbiology is wonderfully experimental. We've been hearing a lot about that over the last few days. And children love to experiment. So we want to ignite this fascination with hands-on experiences by listing a whole range of class experiments that should be both instructive and exciting for the children. And microbiology is everywhere, so it's ideal for class excursions. So these are the three elements, I think, to teaching microbiology in school. What this concept is not is a classic structured microbiology course, with each lesson building on previous lessons, requiring basic knowledge of biochemistry or chemistry, genetics, and a knowledge of technical terms, so that the topic frameworks will be written in layman's language where possible. So to give you an example, this is a template that we're developing, okay? And we start out with a topic framework, and this topic framework is pet dogs. And the child's question is to Daddy in this case. Daddy, the child is saying, Maisie has just been given a gorgeous little puppy for her birthday. Can we have one? And so there's a storyline. And this is a bit long, but I'm going to read it to you because I think it's important for you to get the flavour of this. So what it does is to deal with the issues, the microbiology issues associated with owning a pet dog, positive and negative. So ownership of a pet dog is often viewed as an almost fundamental right for children and comes with significant benefits. Companion dogs provide young children with important health and developmental benefits that include microbiome enrichment, very important, considered to be important for healthy immune system development, and minimization of allergies. These are non-microbiological, regular exercise, development of a sense of responsibility, duty of care for others. Also non-microbiological, the companionship, friendship, devotion dogs provide can also promote the development of feelings of love and joy and affection in children. And importantly, they can provide emotional support during periods of stress and unhappiness. That's the positive side. However, pet dogs can also transmit infections and parasites, and they come with a significant environmental and energetic footprint, resulting principally from the production of dog food. So acquisition of a pet dog has multiple consequences, both for the child, the family, and for sustainable development goals. So the structure of a topic framework is what you've seen so far, the topic title and the initial child-centric question, plus a relevant image, the storyline. And then you have the meat of the thing, which is essentially the lesson, the brief descriptions of microbial activities that underlie or control or influence. The issue discussed, the personal, local, and global consequences of these activities, and how such activities may be affected by anthropogenic changes, positive and negatively. So I've stressed so far the issue of the microbiology influencing us, but of course we also can influence the microbiology, and that's this point here, how our activities, our decisions can affect the microbiology. The relevance for sustainable development goals and grand challenges, potential implications for decisions, this is all about decisions, pupil participation, some suggestions of how to engage the pupils afterwards, once they've had the lesson, and get discussions going. And then for the teacher, a little bit of information about the evidence base and some further reading. And importantly, we have to provide teaching aids. And I mentioned before, we should avoid technical language, but some terms are unavoidable, and so there will be a glossary. So these 100 to 150 topic frameworks are organized in 9 sections. Introductory topics: what is a microbe? Human well-being, so health, planet Earth, water, plants and food crop farming, animals, nutrition, food and beverages, biotechnology, and finally microbes and the rise and fall of civilizations and cultures. And here you see some of the editors who have agreed to edit these sections, but this is not complete. There are other editors that are considered, or other people that are considering being editors. And the goals: to provide appropriate curricula for different age levels in diverse societal and cultural settings, to reveal the major planetary biosphere human processes and problems impacted or underpinned by microbial ecophysiological activities, to inform how these activities affect our well-being and that of other members of the biosphere, to reveal how microbial activities are influenced by our actions and the ensuing consequences, to indicate how we may steer or exploit microbial activities for personal, human, planetary benefit, and to contribute towards the attainment of the Sustainable Development Goals, and to provide a perspective of our place in the wider world and how we are microbially connected in the global village and with the rest of the biosphere. So where are we now? So the topic frameworks, this is the major task. This is in progress. We are still deciding which are the most important child experience-centric topics that should be integrated into this teaching curriculum. We are recruiting authors for these topic frameworks, who then have to write the topic frameworks. These will be reviewed, and then they'll be revised and finalized. I mentioned the class experiments, and this has not yet begun, but it's our next task. And here we have to decide which experiments are the most fascinating and suitable for specific age groups. We have to recruit authors, we have to write them, review them, and finalize them. Class excursions I mentioned, so a comprehensive list of possible local excursions where pupils can experience practical microbiology, and what we hope is useful advice on how to organize for maximum pupil benefit. And this is almost ready. We think we will have this ready next month and published in January. And then the important part here, the teacher aids, videos, games, cartoons, comics. This has not yet been initiated. Funding, so some of these things will... So our aim is to provide all materials free to everybody. And although all of these things are being done by professional microbiologists for free, some things we will have to finance, and this will require some funding. And most importantly, we need to transport this message to ministries of education, to captains of industry, to agencies of all descriptions, in order to get this concept implemented. And this will begin once the tasks 1 to 3 are completed. So I exhort you, if you are interested, get involved. If you like to develop videos or cartoons or comics, if your uncle is rich, or you know somebody in a foundation which has money and is interested in education, please contact them and contact me. And if your mother is in the Ministry of Education, then also please contact me, and we'll see what can be done. It's really important to engage the microbiology community in this as widely as possible, and to get this moving as quickly as possible. So there's a roadmap. I'm not going to bother you with the roadmap. If you look at the recent publication, you'll see what the roadmap is. Thank you very much indeed.
I was also asked to wrap up the conference, and I must say, to begin with, that I was very fortunate to have been invited and very lucky to have attended. I have learned too much for 2 days, but I will try to remember all that I learned. I must confess that I was quite amazed by the number of posters and the quality of the talks. In all cases, I was taught a lot. You see, I've never worked with bioremediation, so most of this was new except maybe for composting, where we try to look for organisms that grow at very high temperature by boosting the temperature in the compost piles. But otherwise, I was amazed at what people have done with the funds they have, which are not very much, and what they are finding out about microorganisms, bacteria, especially methanogenic organisms, archaea, algae, and even plants. One of the missing links seems to be protozoans, but there must be a reason why people are not studying bioremediation using protozoa. Probably they're very hard to grow or maintain, or both. But aside from that, I was also saddened by what Balbina Nogales said. She enumerated many of the problems that we are facing on this planet, and problems that we have to be solved and may not be solved as they should be solved because of political irresponsibility at the highest levels and then at middle levels and so forth. What Ken Timmis has told us exemplifies the fact that there is no, well, not even environmental education, or very little in some countries. But politicians never talk about these matters because they don't give you votes. Okay, that's the truth. They want you to increase salaries, they want to increase the number of jobs, and they want to lower taxes. This is what people want to hear because they haven't heard talks like this one, or like the ones that you have given and shown that there are problems that must be solved by microorganisms, if you wish, by coupling microbial diversity with engineering technology. For instance, I never had heard of electrokinetics, okay? I never heard about, cable bacteria. And I went up and looked it up yesterday. But all of these things are very important, and I will not enumerate, but I was flabbergasted by the number of hormones, antibiotics, that are in the rivers and soils, and we don't need this. Pesticides especially. I never use pesticides on my properties because I think it's horrendous. Okay, I cut the weeds sometimes. Other times they just grow. And the birds love it. But this Congress taught me that there is an area of research which is fertile in people and in ideas and in concepts. There is no question about this in my mind. I just hope that this Congress has brought people together to try and work together from different areas to solve a lot of these problems. I think the destruction of the world is inevitable. It's an invincible foe, but we can always try and make the world a little better by the work that you are doing. And this is what I wish for after this Congress. Both of us have to thank, and you have to thank Olga and the people with her for a wonderful and well-structured Congress. And I hope that this will take place other times and that we can maybe be able to attend. Can you want to? I finished. Congratulations, Olga, and all the other people that
Well, I just want to say one thing. Olga asked me to, as an old biodegradation person, she asked me to say a couple of words on where we should be going in the future. And of course, since I stopped working on biodegradation a long time ago, I feel totally unqualified to do that. But I will just make one point, and that is that, and that's about complexity and networks. So, in environmental processes driven by microbes, we tend to focus on the microbes. So we analyze what's happening in the process. Okay, the compound is being degraded, we measure it, we measure the pH, and we look at the microbes that are involved in it. And sometimes we analyze the bacterial community structure, sometimes we'll include the archaea, sometimes we even will include the fungi. So, and then we see that with 5 different samples, we have 5 different results, and then we try to relate these results to the bacteria, to the microbes on one hand, and to the physicochemical parameters on the other. But the reality is that the microbes are simply a small component of the system. Madalena brought this out in her talk. So the question is, what contributions are being made by the grazers, the protozoa, the flagellates, the small worms, the larger worms, the ants, the insects? Some of these are regarded as ecosystem engineers. So if they're ecosystem engineers and we're looking at an ecosystem process, we have to know what they are doing and what they're contributing to the process. So in my view, one thing that we have to do in the future is to look at all the biological life in our samples if we want to understand what is going on. The next thing is the sort of the geometry, the three-dimensional geometry of the interacting parties. And I come back again to Madalena because she brought up all of these issues in her talk. So microbial communities share resources. In some instances, a single pathway, let's say for degradation of PCB or anthracene or whatever, may be carried out not by one organism in nature, it might be in the laboratory, but in nature it may not be carried out by one organism, but might be carried out by 3 or 10. And each of these organisms that carry out a catalytic reaction, they do not throw out the intermediate into the environment and expect the next partner down the chain to go chasing it. They hand it over directly, like the electrons were handed over in Madalena's talk. They hand the intermediates over, and this means that the partners are in intimate contact with one another. So I think if we characterize, if we image these communities, and we look at the spatial arrangement of the organisms involved in a process, then we can get additional information about who's doing what and how they're doing it, and so on. And then we often tend to do things in the laboratory. We simplify, of course, because we can control better. And everything is done in an aquatic system, just with a couple of partners. It might be a bacterium or a fungus and a substrate. But in reality, it's not only the microbial community which is handling these things, but also there are other things involved. For instance, absorptive materials. So very often substrates are absorbed by matrices in the soil or in the water column. And the bacteria or the fungi or whatever are not going directly to the compound in solution, they're going to the surfaces, these matrices which are there. And so you have a different dynamic in reality, and you have a different process going on. So I think it's really important to try and figure out this interaction of the living organisms with the non-living things. And I've discussed absorptive surfaces, but also the conductive surfaces, and again, this was discussed earlier. So we have to consider these when we're designing laboratory experiments where we simplify. We have to also think about, okay, what does silica do to the process? And then, okay, so that I think summarizes my views on one major issue, namely complexity and the networks. One other thing that I was I've been very excited about for a long time, although I've never worked in it, is this whole area of electromicrobiology. So the things that Federico was talking about. And there are two aspects to this. One is if you apply a current to a sample, you do all kinds of things. You move things around, you move charged materials around, you move things to one electrode towards another electrode, you alter the surface charge of some of the materials in the soil or the sediment or the water column. So you change many, many things. And you provide, of course, a source or a sink for electrons. And then there's the other aspect, that the microbes themselves, or some of the microbes at least, themselves are electrically conducive. So they are transporting electrons around. And in reality, what is life? It's redox. And so electromicrobiology is all about redox. And I think electromicrobiology, and especially in biodegradation, will be very exciting over the next decade or so. And I also thank very much Olga and her team for this wonderful meeting. Thank you.